Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Mac Rowe. I almost forgot it there for a second. I'll be one of your hosts this evening. For the other half of that awesome hosting duo, I'm joined by my friend sitting to my right. How are you doing tonight?
I am feeling all right.
That's
How
all
are
right.
you doing? All right.
I'm pretty good.
Nice.
We record this midway through the week, so
Well, it's the end of the week for some.
yeah. Well, midway through the week for me is can be good or bad. I'm either dreading the rest of the week or looking forward to the weekend, I suppose.
I mean, the world's an imperfect place. Screws fall out all the time. So, I mean, things are different, bound to happen. So you have different expectations for different days, and
Sure.
different folks look at it different ways. So, I mean, it's your middle of the week, like you said, but it's my weekend. So
Yeah. I'm going to
it's
start
nothing but rest and relaxation.
Yeah, I'm going to start making months my new weeks, and that way I'll look forward to the weekend more.
You
right?
have to just look for the month end. I mean,
Yeah. Work for 4 weeks and then take a week off. I could deal with that. You know, I was thinking about it. So for long-term plans, as far as joblessness, one solution that I thought of on my own was that,
bum fights, because it's already been done. They were
Well,
sued
no.
in court and lost.
I mean, that's definitely going to happen anyways, and there'll be a lot more of them, but sign up now. No, it's like,
Jello wrestling.
Nope.
Because you can get that at $14.99
well, now you
an
got me
hour.
thinking about bum fights and jello wrestling, which if you combine those two, you might be onto something. I think
Absolutely.
They did that in old school, didn't they?
Did they?
But no, you could, you could cycle the working population. Everybody works for 3 months and then has a month off, right? And so you cycle that through the workforce as you go, and people can work odd jobs in that month off, or fix up your house, or fuck your wife, or whatever, fuck somebody else's wife. I don't know. Whatever you want to do in that month off, you go knock yourself out. I mean, I'm not talking about like a purge situation here or anything.
Aw.
But hey, maybe if the population gets too out of control,
But you only get 1 week to do it at the end of every
you
month.
can get a lot done in a week, man.
Oh, absolutely.
My schedule's packed.
That would be the most motivational week like I ever had.
Yeah. Well, you get
Every
a long
month.
list, and it's gonna
That
take a
list
while.
it gets shorter. And
Some of those people are spread out.
then you're able to take longer trips after you get, all your shit taken care of locally. Then you can go handle shit and, happens to be across country.
Sure.
Go smack a bitch in California.
Mm-hmm.
Visit a friend in Oregon. You
Right.
know, who knows?
So it'd have to be a federal law. Couldn't be a
Yes.
state law, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, got to make those federal laws, folks. Man, I'm thirsty, buddy.
Are you?
What are
Because
we?
I'm thirsty as well.
I think we're going non-alcoholic tonight, aren't we?
We are, but it could be alcoholic eventually if you left it, if it has the right ingredients in it.
Yeah.
That happens to be
Oh.
Bundaberg. ginger beer.
Bundaberg. Yeah.
Bundaberg. Actually, no. How the fuck would you say that in an
Well, it's
Australian
Australian, so it's Bundaberg. Yeah,
Bundaberg.
sorry, it's hard to do that without going into a British.
accent? Bundaberg.
Big,
You get straight into
Big.
Liverpool.
big. It's tough to do. I'll have to work on that. Get back to you.
Bundaberg. There it is. Bundaberg.
Bundaberg.
Bundaberg. Round the rock with the lorry with the Bundaberg.
Sure. Well, it's crisp and refreshing for a non-alcoholic beverage.
It's craft brewed over 3 days.
Yeah, man. I originally got this stuff for a good Moscow Mule. You take that, some vodka and a bunch of limes, and throw it in a copper cup, and you get yourself a nice drink. But I ran out of limes, so
Oh, did you?
otherwise we'd probably be drinking Moscow Mules right now.
Oh, that would be a nice thing to review.
Are
Well,
you
this bottle says-
Are you ASMRing this bottle opening? I didn't
I am
realize.
because it told me to. The bottle says invert upside down. So I'm doing
Oh
that.
yeah,
I'm
you
letting
got to shake up
audience
the
hear.
sediments, right? Yeah.
And then I'm gonna let
You
them
got to
use-
pull that tab away from the bottle, not straight up, and then up. Yeah, there you go. Got to get that, crack that seal, or it won't. There it is.
Mm.
First, you have to find a man that can open it for you.
Well, you have to make sure it's not above your shit.
Yeah. We don't
And
want to splash
get in
it
the
on
mic, and I don't want to splash
on
the
the
mic, and I
audio
want it to sound good. And this is a weird ass bottle cap where the top half pulls away
Yeah.
and then reveals like a milk carton type tab where you have to grab a hold and pull.
Yeah.
but it's at a weird angle because it's not in the center of the bottle cap. Oh no, that makes too much sense to put it where the
Right.
center of the gravity is. Let's put it at the back for the furthest away is.
I've pulled those tabs right off before and had to get a pair of pliers to open my last Bundaberg.
That being said, this is a great ginger beer.
It is. It's quite refreshing. You get chunks of ginger in there sometimes, and that's all right.
And you let that ginger sit with the sugars, it'll actually ferment and turn into a alcoholic ginger beer.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go for that.
Just the same way with root beer. Root beer is brewed with sassafras, and if you let that sit, that would also become alcoholic. Sassafras. Makes my jaw gurn already just thinking about it.
Well, my friend,
Delicious, delicious sass.
I'm glad we got some refreshing beverages.
Absolutely.
Are you ready to get into tonight's topic?
I thought we already got into this topic.
Oh, did we?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Slightly,
This is going to be part of our series on the nature of consciousness. I think, this is kind of its own standalone episode, so you don't have to go back and listen to the other 5 parts or whatever we've recorded so far on the nature of consciousness. But
the 7 parts I recorded and the 13 parts that we're going to record, but you've already listened to 7 of the ones that we're going to record and only 3 of the ones we've already recorded. So you got a lot of listening to go back and do before you can come back and listen to this one. But go ahead and stay here and listen to it now because you've already listened to the rest.
Yeah, and this is, like I said, it's standalone, so you can listen to this all by itself if you want. If this is your first episode, thank you for joining us, but we've done some other episodes, and I don't really know what order we're going to release them in, but covering the nature of consciousness. And tonight it's kind of a little side pocket on that larger theory, which would be the origin of language. Why is it that you understand these weird noises that I'm making by pushing air over my some weird structure in my larynx to produce move that air and produce different sounds? Why do you understand what I'm saying? Why can we communicate with each other in this fashion? It's really, when you think about it, it's what separates us from the animals. I mean, there's lots of vocal communication in animals, but besides maybe porpoises and whales, I wouldn't say any of them really have a language or speak.
Well, I'd beg to differ. There's lots of language over different animal kingdoms. I mean, crows specifically, they've been known to communicate.
Sure, but I mean, they don't
chimpanzees.
They don't have, syntax and grammar and punctuation and
that we can understand.
Sure,
that we've been able to decipher.
You think crows use present participles? Or
in crow speak, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I absolutely do.
Yeah, no, crows are very intelligent. I was just reading an article the other day, doing some research on this series that crows have been shown to have conscious control over their calls, where some bird species, it's unconscious. So if there's a predator nearby, they make the predator noise.
And everybody hears it, and there's a response. They hear.
Yeah, it's biological. It's like a spinal response in a human, an involuntary response that a lot of these birds, but crows have been shown to be able to control that consciously, and they can make certain noises when they want. Beyond that, their intelligence level is pretty astronomical as far as, perception of. There was part of this article was there was a study that showed that if a crow hides something, for example, and another crow sees it, if he thinks the other crow saw it, he'll leave, but then come back later and move it and hide it again.
Yeah.
So that's that shows you all kinds of stuff about the level of consciousness in a crow. Like they have the memory and then the cunning and then the,
their use of tools. I was watching where they've been using tools.
Sure, yeah.
To open things that other birds and animals haven't been able to use and to get things out of sticky situations where they're like an object is trapped and they really want to get this object. So they use different tools to be able to access it.
Right.
Get out of prevention. They've actually used them to set up different sorts of traps for other animals, like they said. If they're protecting their food and the other animals would come in, it would set off these little booby traps. Like crows are up there in the intelligence.
Yeah, definitely. Probably up there with the octopi and, dolphins. Like
that being said, getting right back into our topic at hand, which is the origin of language, is our language necessarily the sounds, and the words, or can it just be, the sounds and clicks? Because, language isn't just verbal, it's nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
There's other ways to communicate it. So, you could just look at Morse code, for example.
We have sign language and we have written language, and, that's why I can read the words of someone that died several hundred or thousands of years ago, if you're reading the classics. It's crazy to me that, we have the thoughts of this person in this book, and even though they died millennia ago, they can still affect people today just by, reading their words through this thing we call language. It is pretty fascinating, and but specifically, we're going to focus on the origin of human language. I guess I should specify, and I take your point that we probably don't really know if animals have language or not. We're just not as much research as we do. I mean, do we even really know what some of the subsonic whale noises are for, or what they
Absolutely
do, or
not.
they could be.
And what are the sounds that we're not hearing on a different, frequency?
Yeah, exactly.
Our
you know,
brains are tuning that out because our brains can't take it. We would be driven to madness if we just heard it all the damn time.
Well,
So
it's
we've developed these filters to filter
yeah,
out these frequencies so that
selective
we
signals. Yeah, we
don't
touched
go
on that in
nuts.
our last episode. I should mention that chronologically, I don't know how these are going to come out, but the last episode for us in our timeline, we recorded the Nature of Consciousness Part 1, where we touched on uh, AST theory, which is attention schema theory, and bicameralism, which kind of is what shifted us into this origin of language, because bicameralism would have been a voice in your head, so you have to, I guess you would kind of presuppose language in a bicameral situation, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
But also to kind of take that a little step further away from animals and away from humans, more specifically, would be plants. I'm sure plants communicate in some form or another that
Oh
we
yeah,
are
there's been
completely
some
unable.
great research on that. We're actually coming up with ideas for future episodes as you listen to this, folks, because I think we definitely need to do one on animal language because that'd be fascinating, and plant language. So we
Yeah,
could make that
fungal.
a two-parter.
Just
Yeah, I mean
amazing.
some of the latest research on what they call the fungal web that exists pretty much all over the earth, and
Looks exactly like
fungus is like
your
whatever
neurotransmitters.
percentage of the biomass of the planet. This could literally be the brain cells of the earth. Trees use the medium of this fungal mass to communicate things.
Yeah,
about
the true Gaia,
storms
like
and-
a real Mother Nature type thing.
yeah. So we know very little. What we don't know could fill entire libraries. But let's try to stay on topic. We are going to talk about the origin of human language. Just reading a little bit off the internet here. The origin of language and its evolutionary emergence in human species have been the subject of speculation for centuries. It's a topic that's difficult to study because of the lack of direct evidence. We didn't really have the earliest writings we have are only from a few thousand years ago. So,
And if you predate that, you're just looking at pictures that people happen to draw on the walls,
right,
and it's hard to decipher what those really are.
and that's pretty interesting. Maybe that's a good place to start. So, some of those earliest cave paintings that we have, that as we come to understand more about human evolution. We touched on this last episode too. It's not linear. Like the latest evidence, genetic evidence, suggests that there were, as many as a dozen different human variants at one time, and it was, there's all kinds of interbreeding going on. But
Each with a distinct language amongst themselves.
oh, I'm sure, and the language is probably developed by the very action of them, crossing over into the other culture. Well, early hunter-gatherer tribes at that point.
Yeah.
But so these cave paintings that they're finding now that they found them in several locations, they've figured out that it's basically like road signs. Like you would go and there would be things in the environment that would point you to these caves, and the caves would tell you where to hunt what in what location in that area. So you'd be like, oh, okay, here's where people stay, whatever, if you're Neanderthal or a Denisovan or
Rest stop over here.
human.
Gas station over
basically
here,
it was like a
fast
sign
food
that
over
was
here.
saying, hey, yeah, stop here. You got these antelopes over here. You got the woolly mammoth over here. And it was basically, the earliest map system of the world.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting.
So by that time, they've developed languages pretty complex at that point in time. If
Sure,
you're going
I'm
to be
sure
able to
we
leave
had
messages for other
noises that
type
we
of
made.
humanoids
Yeah, exactly.
to
We
be
had
able to follow.
Yeah, we had noises for, there's a mammoth, or look out behind you, or hey, there's a snake here, or whatever. And then
But now, did that start because that's what we were doing, or is that something that we watched other animals do?
yeah.
I mean, did our language start because, we heard these animals making these noises to each other, these responses that were coming from the stimuli that they were providing. So we were trying to mimic those. So we
Sure.
saw what they were doing. So they made this low grumble noise, and
Mhm.
then we saw how the female reacted. So we make this low grumble noise.
Right.
And our female doesn't necessarily react like that. So we submit them to react the way that we wanted to, or whatever it was, or we traded.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many theories about the origin of language that we could do a multi-part episode on that aspect alone. I mean, just glancing at the internet, you've got the structuralist theory, Romulus and Remus theory, hypothesis, gestural theory. So making sounds to accompany certain gestures, tool-associated sound in the evolution of language. So if we were chopping things or breaking things open,
Like
and
the
those sounds are repetitive, then mirror neurons and language origins. This is interesting because there's been a lot of development lately in neurobiology where they're seeing how these mirror neurons work and how facial language between people is very complex and nuanced, and again, it's like a fish in water kind of thing. You don't notice it because you're always doing it, but when you start breaking it down, like we have neurons that respond to external stimuli and go directly to our face muscles and make things happen before we even consciously realize it. So I'm sure there's all kinds of training that can, actors and things can control that, politicians, but your average Joe might not.
Well, they might be able to now with the deep fakes that are coming out. I'm just saying.
Yeah, there was a new one. I just had a link on, but I didn't have time to watch it because I was at work. What was it? It was somebody as Keanu Reeves. Can't remember who.
Bruce Lee.
No, this was brand new. This was like maybe they put Keanu on somebody else. I'll have to look. Anyway, we're getting off topic here, folks. The origin of language in humans, there's no way we could cover all these theories, but we're probably just going to touch on a few. I'll discuss with my friend here what his favorite theory is. We'll go over a few things, and then if you have any theories, you can write us an email. Right now, it's tfitspodcast@gmail.com.
For now.
That's subject to change, so you got to pay attention.
The fuck is this shit we're talking about? Yeah, that's right. We might be changing our shit, so fuck this shit.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's that one. FTS, fuck this shit.
FTS, fuck this shit. It's a whole different podcast, my friend. Well, I think it's time for a quick word from our sponsors, but when we get back, we'll touch on a few of these theories, and there might even be a surprise at the end.
Ooh.
If you stay tuned after these words. Welcome back to the podcast. I switched it up during the break. Having a Angry Orchard hard pear cider. It's a hard pear.
Versus a soft pear, because nobody likes a soft pear.
Well,
some people like a soft pear. Nice
I'm sure there's a whole website out there dedicated to softpears.com. I don't know.
Register that now before somebody else does. Softpear.com.
There's a magazine. There's like a monthly group that meets.
There absolutely is. I'm sticking with the spiciness. Like, this ginger beer actually is a lot spicier than I thought it'd be.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have thought that because, ginger is spicy.
Sure.
But it's a lot sweeter than I thought it would be as well.
Yeah, it is pretty. I didn't even look at the sugar content on that. Like I said, I was putting it in cocktails, so
170 on the caloric count.
It's not bad.
But gram-wise, it's got 40
of
sugar.
Wow. It's more than a can of Red Bull. Anyway, back to the subject at hand, my friend. This is a huge topic, the origin of language. We've touched on a few things. I think...
Haven't touched on anything at all.
Briefly, but there's a whole list of different theories that we kind of touched on before. We can do this in any order, but I was looking specifically at the from where to what theory, which made a lot of sense to me, like trying to give directions or point out a certain animal. Again, this starts with the origin of speech is the exchange of contact calls between mothers and offspring used to locate each other. And this probably happened pre-human,
Yeah.
Like we weren't even fully Homo sapien yet, but this was happening in the earlier hominid species that eventually gave rise to Homo sapien. And then the offspring of the early Homo modified the contact calls with intonations in order to emit two types of contact calls, low stress level and high stress level, basically.
So everything's cool and no shit, take care of that now.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a fucking tiger.
Don't want to be dinner.
Everybody on deck. So yeah, this kind of gets into what we've talked about off mic as far as our own theories on the origin of language and our opinions about...
The whole purpose of language you have to dictate is for communication, whether it be, that there's danger involved or you're trying to trade, but the whole purpose is communication, getting one point across and to understand. So language is going to go across being just strictly verbal. There's a lot more to it. A lot of it's going to be the way something is said physically. You can be completely nonverbal with it. But then again, with the way you say it, with what you're talking about here, with the high stress and the low stress, the verbal tonnage, you can be like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
But even if you don't know my language, you're going to understand that high stress and that low stress. So you're going to be able to understand what I'm trying to convey to you. So even though you might be from, Asia and I'm from South America, we're running from that fucking T-Rex that's over there because you understand me making the big chompy and
Yeah. Big mean thing coming up. And, we can't go we can't go an episode without me mentioning evolutionary biology, but it's one of the precursors of this because we've watched, in the earlier stages, the larynx and the vocal cords evolve sort of, obviously there's a lot of soft tissue in there, but what they can see of the bony remnants and the fines of early hominids is that this developed over time. So the from where to when theory goes on to say that the use of these intonations improved over time. Eventually, individuals acquired sufficient vocal control to invent new words to objects. So, individual sounds start stacking up.
Yeah, so we took the sounds that we mimicked from the birds and things that we heard that we were able to make, and then applied those to that. So, like the snake, you might have seen him been like,
Yeah. Yeah, see, that would be a good way. Like, no matter what language, you could point at the ground and make that noise, and I would know to look out for snakes or whatever.
But then that developed from that. You applied it because that snake happened to live, let's say, in the water bayou.
Mm-hmm.
You developed to call that water a lake, or whatever. So now you have this snake in the water. So it's now the snake lake. So it's a sake.
Right.
So it's kind of developing into what that word, and you amongst that your tribe, you socially accept that that's what that would be, and so then you develop those languages amongst your group and your tribes. Or
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So obviously, communication is the why of the origin of language. So we can check that off the list. But it's the how that there's all this debate over, and how it evolved and how it became so complex and separate from animal communication. Continuing on with this from where to what theory, it's I find it interesting. Several of these theories have the origins starting no matter how it developed. So there'll be different theories, and they all agree that a lot of it started between mother and child and communication between mother and child. But then they go on to postulate a lot of different ways that we got from point A to point Z, wherever the hell we're at now.
Yeah.
Double Z.
Simulation 2.0 Z.
Right. Version 2.135.
Z.
Double alpha.
Exactly. I mean,
yeah. So these offspring learn the calls from their parents by imitating their lip movements. And as the learning of these calls improved, babies learn more new calls. And this is where the idea of phonemes come in through lip imitation only during infancy. So mimicry and the memory of these phonemes lasted for a lifetime, and children, learned the more complex things from other children rather than their parents. And so, the younger generations coming up where it always produce new sounds and add to this language is what this theory postulates. So,
and you can actually back this theory up on your own, because you can take your children when they're babies, and put them in front of learning experiences where they have different languages thrown at them, and these babies will learn the different languages versus exactly what you're throwing at them.
Yeah,
I can speak from experience. I had one kid that watched a bunch of YouTube and for a period of time developed a freaking British accent on specific words,
right?
Because it wasn't words that we said around the house all the time.
Sure, but
it was
she
one
talked
word
about that.
She
was learning it on the internet from a guy across, or a girl across the pond.
Yeah, and so now she says this word with a British accent.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then you have all these things of like twins and siblings developing their own language.
Yes,
there's actually a term for that. I can't think of it right now, but
little shits, you can go down the basement and talk to yourselves while I lock the door and turn off the lights. That's what that shit's called.
Oh well, yeah, there's that. But no, there's actually a scientific term where, but basically, when language develops spontaneously between smaller groups of humans for whatever purpose you might have, and you get into interesting things like dialect and that's just a whole other box of worms when you start going into all the different accents and dialects that we have in modern languages. But going back to some of the other theories, I mean, we got a long list here, my friend. Is there anything that stands out to you?
One of the big things I kind of want to point out with language is kind of like the mythology of it. You can look into different religions have different gods. Like specifically, I know in the Hindu religion they have.
Oh, sure.
Have to look her up now. I'm gonna mispronounce. No, I'm gonna mispronounce this word because I do not speak the language very well at all. But I believe it's Vok.
Vok?
V. An A with a line over it. C. I believe it's Vok.
Yeah, I'd say Vok, like Vac.
And she has the face of a goat.
Sure.
I mean, well, if we're taking, words and personifying them and putting them out as onomatopoeia. Goats sound like back.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then apply that to being the goddess of speech personified would be back.
Right.
And she looks like a goat.
Boom.
I'm sorry, Hindus. I love you.
Sure. Right. Well, I'm a big fan of Chomsky, and he has his single mutation theory, which is basically I'm going to just read it off the internet here because it's hard for me to explain even. I've read some stuff on it. Basically that the emergence of language resembled the formation of a crystal, with digital infinity as the seed crystal in a supersaturated primate brain on the verge of blossoming into the human mind by physical law once evolution added a single, small but crucial keystone. So this is a very complex way of trying to explain Chomsky's theory, but it's basically that we already had the structure of language imprinted on our brain, and
we just had to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, so no matter where humans are, and according to his theory, they're going to develop a language with certain syntax and rules and things that are just built in,
which can be seen amongst various languages that have very similar structures, because Latin is the basis for Spanish and French.
Right.
So I mean, Portuguese, it's the same root for all the words, and the same, you can get a lot of the same root words from the Greeks. So a lot of these words are going to span different continents just because they happen to be similar enough and they can be put into the same roots.
Right. Yeah, basically it's hard for me to understand. Chomsky gets into the weeds on some of the stuff, but basically that, again, it's just the natural byproduct of this evolving brain, this primate brain that allowed language to emerge as this useful tool. But people interpreting Chomsky have said that, that means that language just kind of showed up when the brain hit that point in evolution. But
like we were just dumb.
But Chomsky will argue with that, and looking at like working with like people like computational linguists and evolutionary biologists and stuff. He's worked with these like super high level people in other fields, and shown that might not be the case, that it took a long time to develop this, but once the hardware was in place, like the software just booted itself up, is kind of Chomsky's thing, I guess. Which
would also go back to explain some of our biological filters, because there's sounds out there that we know we can't hear, so our bodies are filtering out this stimuli, so that way our brains don't have to try to filter it out and deal with this constant noise, or else we could possibly go mad or whatever it happens to be. But it's non-essential to us any longer. Exactly, it's no longer beneficial for us, so we filter it out.
Right, exactly. So that goes right into sort of a subcategory of the Chomsky single step theory, which is the Romulus and Remus hypothesis, proposed by neuroscientist Andrei Vishkidev. He basically says there's two phases. And the first phase was very slow, non-recursive language, like this buildup of sounds and grunts and useful communication, like we talked about. But the second phase basically incorporates Chomsky's single-step hypothesis that there was, one day there was language. Like, it falls under, certain places in the brain that handle all this language processing. So, again, like basically the hardware was there ready to go. We had all this processing power. So as soon as we started using language, our brains just gobbled it up, and it went from nothing to, like the grunts and sounds and stuff to like really crazy complicated languages. Like, some of the most ancient languages are Indo-European languages. So there's these root languages. And the theory behind that is that basically this proto-language that led to all these other languages, Latin and Farsi Greek and all this other stuff, is that these guys were the first ones to tame horses, like on the steppes and stuff in Central to Southern Europe. And once they tamed these horses and started breeding them, they just spread like crazy. And so their language kind of dominated all the local languages, or their way.
Which makes sense. That's exactly what would happen. Yeah. If you have a trade and you can go out and you can trade and you can communicate what you're trading in your language, no less, then that puts you at an advantage. And so you're going to explain how to speak your language, and you're going to communicate that well with whoever you happen to come across, especially when you break out with your own tribes, like you said, in every direction, going north, south, east, and west. And taking these horses with you, because that's going to be a huge advantage.
Exactly.
Being able to have the livestock.
The horse people, is like, and then language is the total side benefit or what have you to, meeting the awesome horse people that.
Well, that being said, though, like if I'm trading
Mhm.
and I'm trying to explain something to you,
What are you trading, bro?
I got some pelts. I got some of these pelts over here. Check these
Oh,
pelts
nice.
out. I
Those are
got
nice.
these. I got these pelts from these dudes and horses.
Yeah.
And then I said
Horses.
something, and you're like, "Holy shit, the
What
dudes
fuck
and
are
horses?"
Are those?
Well, no, because you came across them before. They came to your village when they
Yeah,
came
yeah.
past or whatever.
Sure, sure.
But I said a word that you happen to understand because I learned it from them. That puts us
Right.
to where we're able to communicate a little bit better. Even
Exactly.
though we're
Kind of
don't
like what
know each
English
other.
is doing today. Like, the Chinese and the Italians both learn English, and then they don't have to learn Italian or Chinese,
Exactly.
So it works out for everybody, especially us lazy Americans who know less languages per capita than anyone else on the planet. I
Yeah.
was just reading recently.
Oh, it's absolutely true. With the exception of what I think is the universal language.
Mhm.
And no, it's not love. It's music. I mean,
Oh,
the
okay, yeah,
tonality.
Yeah.
I hate to like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but if we're going to communicate with aliens or
Mhm.
another species,
Mhm.
the way we're going to do it is through tones or other
Well, it's
frequencies that we may
basically
not completely
frequency,
understand.
yeah,
Frequency, yeah.
Sure.
These vibrations and signals, and
Yeah.
that's where our closest biological counterparts, dolphins and such, are able to communicate through frequencies and in echolocation, and
Yeah.
they're able to bounce it back and forth, and they can transmit these messages long distance through their environment.
Well, sure. That's one of the first things that mankind broadcast into the universe early on. Scientists, it was like the 60s or early 70s where they were really able to have these big, satellites that could, satellite dishes that could send huge signals out into space that would travel for thousands of years. And one of the first things they broadcast was the frequency for hydrogen, which is the most abundant element in the known universe. So they figured if there was any scientific creature out there, it would know the
What
frequency of
hydrogen
hydrogen.
is.
And so we would send out this coded signal that would broadcast basically the frequency of hydrogen. So that would be our universal language, science, or math or what have you. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting to touch on music, but and I want to talk about that in just a second. Let's put a pin in it because really quickly, like I thought it was really interesting. A lot of the stuff's really over my head, but Berwick and Chomsky. Berwick is the guy, the computational linguist, and he's literally worked with geneticists to crunch numbers and look at certain genes that trigger language, and they basically counted back generations, and they can specifically target the evolution of this what's called the FOXP2 gene, which is very important in modern speech apparatus, in the way that it works in the brain. And they've narrowed this down to about 600,000 years ago.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just interesting to have a number to say that's what this Romulus and Remus hypothesis kind of states, is that first, increase to get to that point was slow. But then, and that was the FOXP2 gene. But the second step, they think, was triggered around 70,000 years ago, which makes a lot of sense. And that's when it exploded and we had full language. So, if you look at like the oldest written stuff and carved stuff we have being 5,000 or 6,000 years old, and language exploded, 70,000 years ago. You got to figure the first things people were, if we even had a written language, like the Druids were writing on bark, and the Mayans were carving wood,
Yeah, well,
blocks and stuff. All this stuff would decompose over time, and
Yeah.
we wouldn't have any traces after 70,000 years, right?
Well, you'd pass it down verbally, perchance, or carve it in the woods. Well, I like the fact that you mentioned or bark, because that reminded me of something. The Aztecs, they believed that way back when everyone was killed off.
Yeah, they had the cyclical nature. There was so many catastrophes.
Yeah,
since
and all
the
that
beginning
was
of time.
left was a man and a woman.
Yeah.
And their god each gave them a language, separate language. That way, neither of them were able to understand each other. And then they were saved on a piece of
Maybe that's why I like
floating
foreign
bark.
women.
No, very possibly it could be, but they were saved on a piece of floating bark.
Sure.
But that story is really similar to what some of the Christians have with Noah taking a man on the female of every creature on a big wooden ship, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No, I remember reading about that. Yeah, that's interesting.
But those stories are similar enough to be where they were told in different languages, but they were passed down verbally.
Of course, yeah.
So it was like a big game of telephone for the history of man or whatever it happened to be.
Right.
But that language would have been communicated in whatever it was, because Christians didn't speak the language of the Aztecs, but the stories are still very similar.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But that goes back into the mythology of
then you
the
get
language.
You get into Joseph Campbell's, Joseph Campbell's work and with the Eternal Hero. What was the name of that book? It's on my shelf over there.
I cannot see it. There is a carpet in the way.
Well, regardless, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think that a lot of these theories probably are partially correct. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're not going to have the full story. I mean, nobody was there. And like you said, it was a big game of telephone. You can see what it is. I just watched a game where these people played telephone, but they didn't do it by speaking a word. They did it by doing an action. So they did a physical action, but they did it across 75 people. But the action that it got to the front was entirely different.
Sure.
The first one was like a peace sign up by the face or whatever, but you got to the end of it as somebody slicing their throat.
Nice.
Like it was like a complete change of what it was.
Oh, wow. Even with physical gestures and everything.
Physical gestures.
Yeah, I got you. Well, I mean, we could circle back around to music. I do remember reading an article. This was several years ago, but it was Smithsonian or maybe it was the BBC. But they found a bone flute that was dated at 30,000 years old. Okay, so
yeah.
Now there was some speculation. Some people were like, "Oh, it's not a flute," but then they put it under a microscope and there was signs of actual
working inside of it.
Yeah, not machining, but obviously
scraping,
something
make the hole bigger.
Had made those holes bigger and done that kind of thing to turn it into what many people believe to be an instrument. But
and it doesn't necessarily have to be a musical instrument. Say it could be an instrument used to mimic the sounds of a bird or another animal that happened to be nearby and was used for hunting. But at the same time, also used as music because that music is the language. Like it
exactly,
it's communicating.
So I think we touched on this in a previous episode too. There were several different species of hominid that were not really what we call Homo sapiens today. You had Neanderthals, Denisovans, all these different, the early Homo erectus, that kind of thing.
The 7 toes, the 9 fingers.
So there were all these different,
big teeth,
big tribes, little tribes, all these different
heads,
tribes of hominids
the
wandering
tiny
around
dwarf
the planet.
People, they were my favorite.
Yeah, and you went through climate change, you went through natural disasters, and there were benefits to being able to communicate with each other. And I think that music could have been one of those ways. And so what was interesting about this flute is that it wasn't found in Africa. It was found in Europe, and it wasn't found with Homo sapiens. It was found with Neanderthals. So, it could be that we didn't even learn music ourselves. We could have learned it from, what we know as Homo sapiens today, like ran into Neanderthals in the hills of Europe, 30,000 years ago. Or maybe we had a drum or something, but then they were like, hey, check this shit out. And they were like, oh my God, where's the bird? And then, we figured out this thing called a flute,
Well, that was another thing too. You were able to tell stories through the music. So you have the animal come trumpling in and then the doo-doo.
Right. Sound effects to stories. That's interesting that it would be the precursor to music is like imitating, like you touched on earlier with the tool sound hypothesis, with the repetitive sound of a chopping or cracking something open that could become the beat.
Just the onomatopoeia of it.
Yeah, or if you're just doing this stuff all day and it's boring or whatever, then you start a little like,
and then your buddy down the street, who's also bored, is like, hey, let me bump some shit with you.
Right, yeah. Or, we're all working together at that point, I'm sure, 600,000 years ago or what have you, breaking open clams on the shores of Africa or whatever. But I just thought that was fascinating because a flute is not the first instrument you're going to invent.
No.
So a 30,000-year-old flute implies that there's probably at least several thousand years of
decay. Like
drums
the first flutes may not have been made
that
of
was made
wood.
before that. There was probably a drum first or some kind of, there's just all kinds of instruments that you could.
Well, a lot of the wind instruments, specifically like the flute and the tonality of it, I remember playing with as a kid, but it wasn't like your standard flute or whatever. It was just a blade of grass. No, it was just a blade of grass.
Oh, right. Yeah. I could never do that with the grass.
So you just put the, blade of grass between your,
just a beer bottle.
Put the blade of grass between your fingers, or even without the blade grass. I can't do it now.
You got to wet your whistle, man. Well, so there are sounds they're going to carry a lot farther too. So I'm sure certain groups developed, throat calls and whistles and things that they could signal people over long distances. And
shout out to the Mongolians. What up, homies?
Oh yeah, who knows?
I know the Mongolians' throat call. They're singing.
Oh, okay, yeah, I got you. Yeah, they got some.
But they're able to transmit that for a long distance. It's great. I love it.
Well, this is a crazy deep topic, my friend.
Something that I think we have to get back into because
I know there's so much more to cover, so we're gonna have to do another part of this part of the other series, which is the nature of consciousness, and maybe the origin of language becomes its own
part
series.
2. No,
Yeah.
no, it's just
This is part 7 of
It's
the third
2.1.
section.
We're getting into the decibels.
Yeah, this is
Decimals.
This is
the decimals.
This is the 7th part of the third section on the nature of consciousness. So go back and listen to the older episodes. Do you got anything that you want to tell the people out there tonight?
I want to tell them excellent to themselves and to each other.
Yeah, do it. And tune in next week for the podcast. Good night.